Yeah. What's up, you guys? This is Panzer. As you saw at the very beginning clip of this video, you saw Panzer is pretty much almost done. I'm pretty excited. I can't wait to drive. It's been, I would like to say, a couple of months, mainly because of me. I'm the one that's been kind of like, you know, adding to the list of parts to replace. Pretty much the whole extent of the project was mainly to recondition Panzer so I can beat the hell out of her. Let's just put it plain and simple. Pretty much everything on that vehicle has been redone. New parts, new components, not only a timing cover, but everything in between and far inside the engine has been replaced. All seals, new gaskets, you name it. Everything, even the subframe got a complete overhaul. I'm looking forward to be driving that. But anyway, for the extent of this video, we're going to be working on Jaeger. And just for those that don't know, Jaeger is my other Mercedes. It's a 2002 C230 compressor. It has the M111 engine. That engine is one of my personal favorites. It has a little compressor, or in this case, supercharger, attached to the side of it. So it's a very good car. It's a lot of fun to drive. It's a nice little hatch. And in this video, I'm going to be showing you how to remove the silencer from that vehicle. As you know, my E55, it whines when I hit the throttle, and with the coupe, it's absent, and it has a supercharger. So with that being said, in this video, I'm going to be removing this puppy. This thing right here is pretty much the silencer that muffles that. Think of it like the supercharger's muffler. It muffles the sound, or pretty much eliminates the whine. And you know, that's something that I just could not have. I did it before on my other coupe, and I loved it. The sound and everything like that in the engine. It's a very strong engine. You can hear it from inside the coupe, and not only that, you can hear that whine when you're accelerating at high speeds. So in this video, that's pretty much what we'll be doing. Let's get going. This is Jaeger. It's my C203 coupe. This vehicle comes with a 2.3 inline 4 supercharged engine. Supercharged is over here on the side under this. I will pretty much kind of like an oil separator, so you will. It's a very it's made out of an iron cast block. It's very reliable, very strong. This one can be modded some to a point where you can, you know, bump up the power, and it can handle it pretty well. Very durable engine. Today we are going to be removing the silencer on the supercharger. It's pretty much like a little baffle with perforated holes that the air travels through, and it silences the whine of the supercharger. Now, like I said before in my last video, I own an E55. I love that whine. I think mostly everyone does. Well, at least people who love to modify their cars for the point. But I want to hear that whine, so I'm going to be removing that silencer, and in the process, going to be replacing other components: gaskets, seals, hoses, crankcase hoses, and then cleaning the throttle body and checking the secondary bypass valve, which is right here, which is this throttle body right here. And pretty much how the system works, just to give you an idea, you got your inlet right over here, goes in through your air filter, goes right through. When the valves close, it travels up here down into the inlet of the supercharger, which is that tube right there, and it goes right into the supercharger, straight down through the pipe, through an intercooler, all the way back up through the MAF sensor, and into right under here, under these covers, is the throttle body, and it goes right into the engine. When that valve's open, it just, like I said, bypasses and goes straight through the system. So you're pretty much, when that bypass is open, you're just running straight engine. Typically it's like that on idle, so the supercharger is not constantly always spinning. It allows it to cool for the most part, yeah, but that pretty much, that bypass is only closed when you accelerate. But let's go ahead and get to it. The first thing we have to do is we're going to be removing 6 Torq screws, which are T20. There's 2 here, 2 here, and 2 here on both sides, crossing each other. Once you remove those, removes the hose clamp and get this out of the way. After that, you have to remove this coolant line just move it out of the way. Be very careful with this. Now, it is a 2002. This reservoir here seems in pretty good. It doesn't look like it's cracking. I don't see any stress marks. Normally with a car this age, I can always tell that there's always stress marks or cracking or seepage, but this is actually pretty good. It looks like it probably was replaced recently. I have to check the manufacture date on here. I know it's somewhere around here, but I'm pretty sure this is actually pretty good. So, but you know, if you have a very old, if you have the original one, be very careful removing this hose. This little stem comes about like 2 inches out. So when you take it off, pull straight. Don't wiggle it. You got to pull straight out. Once we do that, there are three. Well, yeah, there's going to be 3 E10 screws, which is one back here, one over here, and I believe the third one's right behind here. Or I could be wrong. I'm trying to remember exactly. Well, I guess this one just has 2. And then we got to remove the crankcase ventilation hose here and separate this breather hose as well. Now, I've mentioned this before. These hoses, they're designed to, when they age to a point, they harden like a hard plastic, and that's a hard plastic. This is going to be a pain in the butt to remove. It's going to come apart, so don't panic as long as you have the replacement. If you don't have the replacement, I would wait until you have that part ordered. Now, I already ordered everything, so I don't have to worry about it. But this right here is going to come off in pieces. If it comes off, there's probably going to be this this ring here still wrapped around the hose, and you can see there's residue already. So oil seepage, and well, obviously it's seeping through the plastic, through the porous. It's very porous. Let's just put it that way. But it will break apart. You don't want any of the pieces to fall in. That's for sure. Once you do that, right here at the bottom, there is a hose clamp. Right there, if my phone can focus. There you go. It's right there. You just gotta unscrew that with a 7mm, or you can use a flathead screwdriver. No biggie. And then you should be able to pop this up. Now, don't pull all the way, because remember, there's a harness connected to this throttle body, or the recirculation flap. You can see the harness right over here. You could remove it from down here. It's possible. And if just in case you can't, you know, when you lift it up, you should be able to turn it on its side and pull the harness off. But anyway, that's kind of like a little breakdown of what I'm going to do. So in the meantime, while I'm doing that, I'm going to go ahead and pause the video, get all that done, and we'll go back. Alright, so I went ahead and loosened all 6 Torq screws with a T20, and then with a 7mm or a flathead screwdriver, I already loosened the hose clamp. You want to lift from the end first, and you should be able to just slide out at the end right over here. And just like that. And there's your filter. It's a good time to inspect it as well. Obviously this end's going to be pretty clean. It's the other side that's probably not going to be clean. We'll find out. Platelets look pretty good, actually. It's not. Yep. This filter was actually changed recently. Obviously it's not the factory one, but it was recently changed. You can see all the dirt and contaminants stuck at the bottom. I'm going to go ahead and vacuum that out later. Anyway, you can see the recirculating flap down there, and as you can tell, there's a good amount of oil present. So that means that's what this pretty much is. It pretty much will get most of the oil. It has like a little sump right here on the bottom. We got to remove this piece next and loosen the hose clamp on bottom and get those 2 E10 bolts out. Let's go ahead and go to the next step. Oh, and the coolant hose. So went ahead and removed this hose. Again, it just slides right out. And I was already in the process of removing this crankcase ventilation hose. And if you notice, I was barely gonna take out this this lower vacuum line, and it just completely separated with very little effort too. So there was already oil buildup here, so that's probably from there, because it already had a lot of cracking, so it was probably just seeping, especially around this end over here. So I went ahead and just, well, I'm gonna have to keep that yellow piece. The yellow pieces, you're gonna need that, because you're gonna put that on the new line and the new crankcase hose over here. And I'm already starting to separate it here. You have to be very gentle and just flex it. And don't worry, it's already gonna break. As you can see, it's already starting to crack. It's already starting to crack pretty bad. This thing is hard as plastic, so if you need to, you can go all apeshit on this thing and just rip it out. You don't really want anything to fall right in there, so just keep that in mind. I just wanted to point that out as I'm continuing with this. Let's see if I can. It's gonna be a pain. Well, I'm gonna get some pliers and destroy that thing. Just wanted to let you guys know when you're taking that off what to expect. E10 bolts have been removed. The last thing right behind over here, there's also another hose which has to be popped off. Now this hose is very soft. It looks kind of porous, or it could just be coated in oil. You just got to pop that off before you start pulling this thing. And obviously, you know, work your way with this. You can use this as you're pulling this. This should pop off right off, but you want to kind of keep your hand here while you're grabbing, so you're gonna need both hands just to get that end off. I already loosened the bottom hose clamp down there, so this should just come straight off. So I'm gonna go ahead and continue doing what I'm doing, and I'll get back to you and I'll show you pretty much with the assembly off and out. So I removed the top canister off, and like how I said before, it's pretty much like an oil separator. Obviously you got your inlet's right over here, and there's like a little sump, so that catches most of the oil. There's little baffling chambers inside, and this comes straight out of the supercharger. And I can tell there's a lot of oil in there because there was a lot dripping out when I tilted it a certain way, unless I got most of the oil out. But you can see it in there. If I can focus, you can see a good amount of oil present in there. So I got to clean this thing up pretty well, and you can tell part of that piece is still stuck on there, so I got to just tear it a little bit. It should come off right away. And there's that line that I'm going to replace as well, and go straight down in there. So just pretty much what you're gonna have to do at this point is just a lot of cleaning, inspecting, and cleaning this piece up pretty well. Look at all that oil, just that buildup around it. Most of it's mainly because of that crankcase hose right there. A lot of it just seeps, collects here. From over here, it's kind of hard how that got there, but you can tell it's mostly from here. And over here, you're going to be able to see the supercharger better. So I got to remove those bolts. There's 4 of them. I got to make sure you cover the inlets here. This is for the bypass, and this is directly into the supercharger. You don't want nothing to go in either one of those. And here's the harness for the recirculation, and the other harness down there. Here's the line. I should be able to replace this right away, because it looks like it. Oh no, I thought it tore, but it didn't. Alright, so the next step is pretty much just a lot of cleaning before we separate everything, the casing from here. Look at thought that was a crack. It looks like it is. I can't tell yet. Nah, it's not a crack. It's just where it sits on top here. So right here is where the that silencer sits. It sits in this casing. It's just one big piece of plastic with a lot of perforated holes. That's pretty much right after the supercharger. Obviously the inlet goes in through here from the back end, and it comes up through that silencer and straight down into the downpipe over there to where you have the intercooler at, where it cools the air. So this is what we need to get to next. But before I do that, I'm just going to do a lot of cleaning and get everything taken care of. It's apart. Right now I'm just cleaning the recirculation valve, kind of cleaning all around it, and I wanted to share this with you guys. So this is pretty much like a catch can. This is where the oil sits. Obviously it's upside down, but this is where the oil sits. There's a baffled chamber in here that kind of catches the oil particles, the wet oil particles that run through this thing. And if I look in here, I'm not sure if I can focus. There you go. You can see the chambers. Now it's kind of similar to what the silencer does. So I'm pretty sure it either does something with the air, but I know it uses that to trap most of that oil. And as you can see, I drained this thing already. All the oil residue that was in there when I tipped it upside down, it was a lot. So this thing was pretty much full. This car barely has 100,000 miles on it. So I'm pretty sure it's never been, you know, emptied. If only this thing had a drain port, that would come in handy. Maybe I can probably fab something right here. I don't know. But I just wanted to share that with you guys, that little that chamber in there. That's pretty cool. So it's like its own little catch can, or a big catch can actually. Alright, so I'm making some very good progress. After taking the oil separator off, which is that black box right here, the next step is to take this top casing, or the pilum, for the supercharger. It is held down by 6 E12 bolts, and you will need an extension and a swivel just to kind of get, or an angled swivel just to get into at least the bottom ones down here, because there's not much room, and to get to the bottom back one, which is right down there, which are these two here. Now the extension has to be pretty long. The longer the better, maybe not too long. This is like a good 12-inch extension, like a foot. And obviously you got your swivel, and then obviously your E12. You should be able to remove these off no problem. They're not held on. I think it's 20 newton meters or 25 newton meters. These are bolted down. I have to double check. I will have that linked in the description below, just so you have the correct specs for reinstalling this. But anyway, so those 6 bolts there, and then you're going to come right down over here, and there's 2 things you got to remove. There's going to be another an E-bolt right down in there, and it pretty much hooks onto this coolant line. And here's the down area of this piping. It connects these 2 together, and the bolt sits directly there. Sorry, it took my phone a little while to focus. Right in there, and you cannot get a socket in there unless you remove the fan, but that's unnecessary because you can actually get away removing this. This is probably like maybe torqued down to like what, 8 newton meters, so I could be a little off, probably less. I used a 8mm wrench just to loosen it, and all you got to do is loosen it just enough, and then you can take it out by hand. Then the last step is removing a hose clamp, which is right down there. Now, I already removed it ahead of the video. Kind of did all this before. But the clamp sits just like this. And it connects the piping to that hose piping down there. So it just clamps it together. It keeps it together. So that's the last thing you got to remove just to take that top casing off. So what I'm going to go ahead and do, and as you can see, I cleaned off that excess around here. I actually do the same. I had to do the same with this piece over here. As you can see, it's nice and clean. All the pieces for that, it just came apart. I had to pry it very carefully, but This is the piece that was stuck to the catch can area, and this is the other end that was pretty much stuck to the crankcase. Now it's all in pieces, obviously, as you can see. There's little pieces everywhere, but you do have to kind of pry it loose enough to where you can break it in half, and it should separate like this one did. As you can see, it's very brittle. And obviously this is the new old vacuum line here. I bought a new one. Well, pretty much everything new. And then I can go ahead and continue. Now I'm just going to remove this casing. Once I do that, I'll be able to show you what it looks like from inside. I went ahead and removed it. As you can see, there's your supercharger. Ignore all the shit around it. That's pretty much the debris from the hoses that had to take apart. And I believe I might have a leak. I might not have a leak. I don't think so. The valve cover seems pretty good, and I don't see seepage anywhere. All that oil residue is going to be mostly because of this, as you can see, the seepage kind of going down here. Yeah, it's going to be mainly because of that crankcase hose, and you can see how scary that can look to a person who's not really, like, you know, who tinkers with their cars. Let's just put it that way. They might see that and be like, oh no, I have a very extensive leak, and it could just mainly be because of a worn hose, a hose that pretty much is so dry that it doesn't offer a very good seal, and the oil just seeps through over time. And you can see it just kind of builds up all on this side only, because everything else is relatively really clean, minus this front area, which I'm gonna have to actually check that, because I may have something there, who knows. But there's your supercharger right there. I already covered that inlet out. I gotta cover this top portion because I don't want nothing falling in there. Now normally you're supposed to use a lint-free cloth, but I don't have one. I'm not removing the gasket yet. I'm just gonna leave it there. I'm just gonna cover this so no debris falls over. You know what? Let's kind of clean the edges here. You can see all the oil that builds up. And that's mainly because that catch can was already full, so it didn't have any room for storage, so everything was just passing through. But you know, for the rotors, everything inside looks pretty clean. I don't think that's scoring. I think that's pretty normal there. Everything else looks good on the blades. You got some oil caught up in there. I got to drain that out. So this is the inlet down here. It gets forced through. It pushes right through the supercharger up and straight back down into that piping. And of course, here's the back end of it. And here's that baffle. Look at that. Look how just restraining that looks. Now I already got a baseline tune on this car, so I'm gonna see if this actually does anything. I know this is mainly designed for silencing the supercharger, because this is right afterwards. This is right after the supercharger itself, so the air gets pushed through and it filters in through here. So I'm pretty sure that's what this is for. Well, I know that's what this is for. And there's that bolt that I have to seal. These two, you don't really have to worry about it. You can actually put these back in here after you take this this casing out. But that bolt you have to seal, and you can use the same bolt and a nut at the other end, or you can just weld it. I'm gonna figure out what's the best option. Normally what I did before, I just put a bolt in the other end, Locktite it, sealed that pretty well, and it did me good. I didn't really have to worry about it on my previous coupe, or worry about that nut going through and then going into the engine. But even then, there's a lot of things that block anything from going through that whole end. There's a lot of metal netting through the piping. But yeah, that's the main thing we got to do. We got to take this piece of plastic out. Alright, so all three bolts were removed, and I'm going to take this silencer out, and you're going to see what I'm talking about. So obviously air gets forced into this inlet here, and most of the air travels directly to there, but some of it gets pushed through these little channels. And as if I can just take this off real quick, you see exactly what I'm talking about. Check that out. Kind of looks like a spaceship. But yeah, that's pretty much what the air gets pushed through. A good percentage of it pushes through the outlets of these little baffles here, and then travels through here on the sides back into the engine, or the direction where the engine is. That, to me, that would pretty much muffles that sound of the silencer of the supercharger completely. Big plastic plug. And there's your hole that you're left with. This would pretty much holds that bolt in. But yep, that's that piece. Crazy, huh? Oh, this is gone. Now I'm just going to clean this up and I'll continue. Alright, so instead of putting one of these screws in and putting a bolt on the other side, a lock bolt, I went ahead and just tapped it. I tapped it and bought one of these from my local parts store, or this place, Nuts and Bolts in El Paso. And I'm going to go ahead and just Locktite it and torque it down. Now the cool thing about this is I can, which I seriously doubt it, but if I ever plan to put this back in here, I can still use this and it'll still seal. And I should still be able to use the factory hole placement versus welding it, which welding it's generally not a good idea because this is cast aluminum. It's best not to. So, you know, tapping it is actually the best alternative, and it doesn't really cost much to do. You can do it yourself or take it somewhere and they can do it for you. In this case, I just went ahead and did it myself, and that's pretty much it. Used the 5/16 and I was able to tap this in, and it screws in perfectly. So obviously this is gone. I'm gonna go ahead and get this sealed up. I already cleaned up the oil catch can box. This is what I would call it. And then of course I already cleaned up the actuator flap, or the recirculation valve, which is pretty much the throttle body that keeps everything either running through the supercharger or just straight directly to the engine. All that's good, everything's cleaned up. I'm gonna polish and clean this up a little bit and we'll get back to putting everything on. Alright, so I got all 6 bolts on. That hose retainer clip is a pain in the ass, but I got it on. That bolt has been placed on. Gasket's in place all the way around. Now to torque this supercharger. The specs read 21 Newton meters starting from center. These two in the center, crisscross pattern. And that should seal it up really nicely. 21 Newton meters. So you want to hand tighten them very lightly without over tightening it, and then you finish it off with a torque wrench. And then we can finish off with the new seal. Here's the vacuum line hose. Obviously I got the vacuum line hose all set up. It's gonna go right on there, and the new fitting onto here. And this is one new hose line. Obviously I reused this centerpiece with just a new crankcase hose and vacuum line. Big difference, right? Especially from that hard line and that broken piece of plastic. So I'm gonna go ahead and torque these puppies up, and then we'll go ahead and put the catch can on top and cover the top of the intake housing, air intake housing, and we should start it up and see how she sounds. Pretty excited. Alright, so I'm going to do a video real quick of the unsilenced supercharger. Let's see if you can pick it up. Awesome. Hopefully that was good enough. go for round 2. First gear. Woo. Not too bad, not too bad. All it needs now is that pulley and the tune.